Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another sort of Modern Monday episode. Went out to play Modern today, which is I think September 12th, and yeah, kind of talk about some game today. And I think today was pretty exciting in terms of um, me as a player just playing really well. I think better than normal, namely because I was playing against certain decks that I didn't know how to play against, or I did some sort of like just tricks and stuff to kind of get the edge on my opponent in terms of knowing how to play around certain things and stuff like that. And so let's go ahead and just talk about my matchups today. Jump into some gameplays, and I'll show you some cards I cited in for those particular matchups. So in case you do play blue-white control, Esper or Jeskai, or in some cases nowadays five-color control. So I've been watching a couple of um, videos from aspiring spikes and some other sort of relevant Magic Online players and stuff like that. And I guess to kind of digress a little bit, let's talk about some of the new cards that came out of Dominaria. And I think I already spoke about them last episode, but this episode I kind of want to bring them back up because I've been watching Aspiring Spike play um, Leyline Binding, and um, it seems like it is a very playable card. It's good in a sense that it you can make it cost one by turn two, which is really nice, and it's got flash, which makes it technically better than Prismatic Ending, and for the most part, it's cheaper than Prismatic Ending to play. The downsides of it, at least in my opinion, is that it's an enchantment, which if your opponent was playing enchantment removal, it they can remove that, and whatever card that you sealed away will come back. So that's obviously one negative. Negative two is it kind of screws with your mana base because you have to kind of fetch certain things certain ways, and you have to play like mandatorily. If you have a Leyline Binding in your hand, you have to get a Trinome turn one. So it doesn't allow you to really play anything on turn one. If you play a fetch land, you have to fetch for a Trinome. Otherwise, your Binding becomes too expensive if you don't get at least three types of lands into play. And so that's the one thing I don't like about it. So if your opponent's playing like a Ragavan and like you had a choice between, I guess, um, Prismatic Ending versus Leyline, you have to shock. If you have both in your hand, then you have to make the decision to shock and um, bring in Hollow Fountain to kill the Ragavan, for example. Um, and that means your land turn two is going to be a little bit more awkward because if you have a counter spell in your hand also, then now you have to fetch for probably a ley line and have your which at this point I'm not sure which ley line or which fetch lands they play, or sorry, which trinomes to play. Like because then you have hollow fountains and now you have to fetch something that gives you three colors. So that's like I don't think anyone plays the black, green, and red one. So I don't know. Like it's a little awkward. It's a great card. Um, I think if you're going to include it in just like pure white blue control, at that point I think there's better selections of cards that you can possibly play if you're adding red to your mana base. Maybe black. I guess if you're playing normal blue white where you already have green, red, and now you're adding black, I think there might be better cards to splash in. I guess and in my opinion, it doesn't work too well in the way I designed my particular deck too. Because I am playing Snapcaster and it's a lot worse. Now you can't obviously Snapcaster the ley line back if it dies or something like that. and you have no way of just kind of reusing it. Yes, you could like Teferi, bounce the leyline back to your hand, draw a card, and like leyline again. That's something you could possibly do, but I I guess in my opinion, it's a great card, but you have to build your deck around it. If you don't build your deck around it, like if you're playing something like how I'm playing, then that card can't be played in the deck, I believe. It just conflicts with too many things. It conflicts with the mana base I'm trying to set up for my particular build of the deck. It kind of doesn't work too well or synergizes too well with Snapcaster, for example. And I mean, it works okay with uh, Baby Teferi, but outside of that, I think the amount of diverse removal I have in my particular deck makes up for it. Like the one thing this particular deck can hit better is Planeswalkers, obviously. Leyline's great in that sense. I think it can hit Planeswalkers fairly easily, so you can hit like, Ren and 6, Teferi for 1 mana, stuff like that. But I guess if you're hitting a Teferi for 1 mana, you just gotta hope that they don't have enough Teferi to just kind of bounce the ley line and get their Teferi back and draw a card and plus again. So that's kind of like another issue you might have to deal with if you're playing against an off deck or a mirror match, and you're ending a Teferi. If they have some way of bouncing back your ley line, then you're kind of you know you're kind of back at square one, and giving them back a Teferi is not a good idea either. So I'd rather just go for the permanent removal using prismatic ending. But once again, Leyline I think is for the purposes of getting rid of planeswalkers. It's a really good card. For everything else, I think March and prismatic ending can take care of everything else. And we have a bunch of creature hates too, so I don't think you would normally use Leyline to fight against creature hate. Usually you use prismatic ending, fatal push, or march or solitude or something like that to hate against creatures. I don't think you would want to really use a leyline against creatures, but it comes into whatever scenario you're in. You might be left with no option, and that might be the way to go. But yeah. And the other card was temporary lockdown, I believe, and I mentioned that I think last week for sure. I think it's a good Pioneer S card. I don't think it's really too good in modern. Now you can definitely play in the sideboard. Like if you play temporary lockdown against a Yawgmoth deck or some Yawgmoth deck, you can just clear their entire board, or some other stuff. But at 3 mana, and I guess I can sometimes hit my own stuff. I guess it mostly will hit my own Snapcaster. But I don't know. I don't think I would main it. I'd just probably play it on the side. It is kind of a slow card. It is 3 mana, so, and most of the time, you might just only imprison one or two things at most with um the card, and that might be too slow. I'd rather just start removing. I'd rather play efficient 1-for-1 removal rather than rely on something like the prison card. So I guess those are my opinions on there. So I think I digressed pretty for pretty long. So let's go ahead and move on to some of the gameplay matches I had today, and then kind of talk about the cyborg and some stuff that you might learn. Okay, so game one, played against a mono black Cabal Coffer reanimator deck, I guess. So I think it's a pretty cool deck. It's kind of like a different take on Aspiring Spikes deck, but I think a few tweaks here and there could have made the deck a little bit better. So what I mean by that is that I knew the person playing it. They were playing like grief. They grief it and try to reborn it. With the revival cards, but he was playing the 2 mana revival one. I forgot the name of it, but it's 2 mana revival rather than like Malekith's Rebirth or the other one that Scram plays, Rakdos Scam. So his grief wasn't as effective. per se, but he still hit my hand pretty heavily. But I think game one I had pretty good answers, so he was just not really able to kind of set up anything. He did get like couple coffers and stuff, but I think he was kind of mana stuck. Um, so by the time he was able to get his mana to work for him, I already kind of set up my board. I had like a bunch of Teferis. I think I even had Jace and some other stuff on board. So no way he was coming back. He stumbled a bit game one, so pretty pretty easy victory for me for game one. Game two, let's see what took in. Sorry, put in. I thought about the chalices, but I think I saw that he also played chalice, so I that I'm not playing any chalice because I was like, okay, if he's playing chalice, he's probably not playing any one mana, you know, cards that were worth it. So I decided to go for more or less something like, I guess this. I think he just went this. And I took out a couple of like cards. I took out like opts um, and I think some of like the prismatic endings. A couple, maybe one or two prismatic ending, maybe a march or something like that, or a dam. Because I want more instantaneous responses. Because if they're casting grief, invoking it, they most likely have a card that's gonna revive it. So I took out all the sorcery, a lot of the sorcery speed removal and interaction for more went for more of the um, instant speed or Teferi. So Teferi in this matchup is really good. I guess against any deck that's doing the grief with the Fury combo, I really like it because you play Teferi. If they do grief on you, they can't revive it anymore since whatever spell they're gonna cast to revive it is generally an instant spell. So you can kind of hose their strategy in that sense. So I think the fairy was really good. Like if he's gonna grief, he's gonna just be hard casting grief. I don't think they're gonna be invoking the grief anymore once you have Teferi out on the board. So Teferi was good. Salty, in case he does turn one grief, I'm able to also turn zero. Salty his grief. That way, we trade cards and we make his revival cards in his hand more dead. So that's the idea behind the salty. Same thing with the solitude. If they grief you, solitude. Salty is better in that sense because salty will force them to put it back on top of their deck, have them try it again. But salty will definitely get rid of it, but you'll end up losing like 3 cards because once the grief resolve, they do take a look at your hand. So that's kind of an issue with salty there. Other than that, I think the void ran in case they did manage to resolve with grief or something. I'll get rid of it. Same thing with Kaz Gaio. Kaz Gaio, if they invoke it, great. You can then Kaz Gaio. There's 2 modes you're gonna choose. You're gonna choose to sacrifice a creature and exile. So even if they somehow resolve, a revival spell, or if they wanted to put the revival spell on the stack before Kyle's Gale, it doesn't help them because once Kyle's resolved, it's gonna sack the grief and exile immediately, so the revival spell won't bring it back. So that's why I put in the Kyle's Gale, and it's really good in that particular scenario. So yeah, game 2 he does get the advantage. I think he griefs and does some stuff. It kind of annihilates my hand a little bit. And he manages to get the Karn out. So I was kind of just in top decking mode. So he goes Karn, gets liquid metal coating, and then tries to liquid metal coating. I had a counter spell for it, and then he goes and grabs the creature Piffling Needle. It's a 2/1 basically Piffling Needle. Plays Piffling Needle, and then my turn comes around. I play a prismatic ending, remove the Karn. He attacks me. He passes. I go again. I remove the creature Piffing Needle with another prismatic ending. I pass back. He goes. Doesn't do anything. He does call Teferi with the Piffing Needle, the 5-mana Teferi. Somehow things work out in my favor. I end up top decking the Teferi after I removed the creature, played the Teferi, uptick it, and the game was essentially over from there. He had no way of removing my Teferi anymore, being mono black, unless he was playing like um, Elder Spell or something. I don't think there was a way for him to really remove the Teferi. Maybe he got an Arcana off, he can Prifneal the Teferi, but it doesn't look like he had anything in his hand that was going to deal with Teferi. So he ended up just giving me the game there. So he scoops. And yeah, so that's how I win my game one. I think um, I think game two I played it pretty well. I don't remember if I was able to Kyle. I think I end up Kyle Gowling his grief when he does try to do it, and I think that's what essentially won me the game because he couldn't stick the grief on the board anymore and couldn't get the second trigger off the grief. So I think all of his revival spells in his hands were kind of dead. And then we're in kind of top decking mode. I was trying to fight against the Karn and the liquid metal coating and stuff like that. But yeah, um, I mean, I think yeah, he does like get one or two cards off because I think he plays like the 2 mana um, Thoughtseize or whatever, and then he plays the grief and stuff. But it just wasn't enough for him because I guess once my Teferi resolved, he just couldn't get rid of it. And yeah, not much to really say about that game. I wasn't sure if I was playing correctly against him. I think I was, even though I have never played against a scam deck before. I think that was a decent game for me. So, game or round two, sorry, round two. I play against Grixis Death Shadow, and yeah, game one was kind of rough. He thought sees me. Gets Crocs into the grave. Now Croxa was a pain because I couldn't really deal with him effectively. Um, Essentially, it came down to him having 2 life left. The main turning point of the game was he had 2 life left. I had a Snapcaster on the board. I had Snap in hand, Salty, and an Ending on the board, and he had a Croxa. So when he Croxa'd me, I end up pitching the Ending, and my turn comes around. I play Snapcaster, recasting the Ending to get his Croxa, but he fatal pushes it. Now that I wasn't too sure if that was the correct play. I think a better play for me would have been to flat because I had 2 mana open on his turn. My the better play for me should have been to after he Croxa comes out on the board and triggers. I should have just flashed in the Snapcaster, pitched the Ending for with Solitude, and then do that. And if he gets rid of his if he fatal pushes the um, Croxa, I guess then he'll have to deal with lethal. If and prismatic ending resolve, or sorry, if solitude resolves, I would get rid of his Croxa. I won't have to deal with it anymore, and then he would um, push one of my Snapcaster, which is fine because he was at 3 life. I just really need to be able to clock him in 2 turns. So I think that I should have went with that play because what ended up happening because I tried to do that and then he fatal pushes his own Crocs. So next turn he casts his Crocs again, gets rid of my subtlety, and now I basically am kind of defenseless. I have no cards in hand, just a bunch of mana and nothing else to do. So I think game one, that's what the second line of path of playing would have been better than the path I chose. I didn't expect him to have the fatal push, I guess. Like I figure he had either drown lock or fatal push, right? So I didn't think he would try to fatal push his own Croxa, which is why I went with the Snapcaster into prismatic ending play rather than just invoking the solitude instead. I guess the other option was just letting the you know the Crocs come out, lose my ending, just flash in the Snapcaster, my turn, draw, play a just hard cast salty for 5 mana, and that could have been good too. I think, um, but I don't know. I don't know what would have been honestly better. Um, by reading like he had two cards in hand. I guess I was just too scared to drown or something, and I just kind of ended up misplaying against that. So that was game one. So he got it. Game two, he kind of stumbles a little bit with mana. Um, but he does manage. So even though he stumbled with mana, it was just in his favor because turn one, um, I didn't have Void yet, but like I ended up playing Challenge the Void while he had a So I guess okay. So game two, I go first, play my land. He goes, he plays a Ragged Band. I go, I play Chalice of the Void. Cool. All right, that shouldn't be any issues. He goes, he attacks with the Ragged Band and pills a March on top of my deck, and I was like, oh crap, I didn't think he would have peeled one. Um, my mistake was that I had a Solitude in hand plus a card to pitch for it. I didn't get rid of the Ragavan, thinking like I'm I should be safe. I'll get rid of the Ragavan next turn because I'll be at 3 mana. I can play Teferi, bounce the Ragavan. That'll be it. Game over, right? So he goes, he peels the March off, gets rid of my Chalice. So I'm like, okay, great. I'm down to Chalice. His Ragavan's still there. Okay, my turn. I draw. I happen drew into another Chalice, so I have having to decide between playing Chalice or playing Teferi. I am just going. You know what? Let's try it again. Let's go ahead and Chalice. So he's tapped out right now. He doesn't have any blue mana to counter my Chalice. I'll Chalice again. He goes. He attacks with the Ragavan. This time I just saw to the Ragavan. Like I just don't want to deal with the Ragavan anymore. It was just annoying, and if he peels like another prismatic ending or in a March, then it's basically game for me. Like I can't come back from that. So I decided to go ahead and Chalice or get rid of the Ragavan. And oh, sorry. In terms of talking about what I sided in, I think I put this in something like this, I want to say. Maybe some salties too, but yeah, definitely want Chalice against this deck. The Spell Bomb were a maybe. I wanted to do Spell Bomb because I knew he had Croxa, so I for sure wanted to at least try to get rid of the Croxa with the Spell Bomb. Obviously, these two cards kind of conflict. I had to try to draw one or the other first. Intergus in case, of a Blood Moon or something, but it wasn't super important. I didn't think this card was super necessary. Teferi is still great. Shut off their interaction with you, and then Kazgal to get rid of their graveyard. And so, anyways, I resolved the Chalice. I kill off the Ragavan with the Solitude, and then he goes Hearse. He starts playing Hearses. So that was what I wasn't expecting. So he plays the Unlicensed Hearse. He plays two of them, and we go back and forth a little bit. He plays Hearses. He plays a Shredder. Okay, so I guess good thing for me was that he was never able to really get his Shredder to 2, but he was getting rid of my graveyard. He was just kind of being very aggressive with the Hearses and just kind of like annihilating my graveyard. And I assume he was in fear of a Snapcaster, which is fine. But in the end, I think I was able to resolve like a 5-mana Teferi, and he was just kind of trying to poke down my 5-mana Teferi with a Shredder. That was a 1/3, and so that didn't really help him there. He couldn't even crew the Hearse to try to because I think he had a 4/4 Hearse and a 2/2 Hearse because he had two of them on the board and a Shredder, and the Shredder was 1/3, so he couldn't crew any of them, so he couldn't even really threaten my Teferi. So he kind of ignored it. At this point I was kind of running out of cards in my hand because I kept I had to deal with losing a Chalice, I had to deal with Ragavan losing like 2 more cards. I had a bunch of lands in my hand, so I was kind of in a rough situation too. But basically, um, the game goes on for a little bit, and I guess he just couldn't deal with my Teferi. I eventually get it to um, pretty close, and I think I end up ulting the Teferi. He does play. I think he does siding like a Torok, so he does get Torok on the board. Torok kickered. I had like two lands and two baby Teferis in my hand, but I managed to ult the big Teferi, play small Teferi. I think I get rid of his Shredder with like a prismatic ending or something like that. Either way, I ulted Teferi, minus Teferi, bounce a one of the Shredders, or sorry, one of the Licensed Hearst, and use Teferi's ability to remove the Torok. I think that works that way because I think Teferi's ability just gives you a token, so it's not a white card per se, a white spell. It's just a token. Whenever you draw a card, you exile a permanent. Yeah, so the emblem is colorless, so I believe that's how we agreed on it. The emblem is just colorless. It's an ability. It's not Teferi minusing to bounce the Torok, since Torok does have protection from white. So correct me if I'm wrong on that one. I think that's how that works there. So I think he ends up just scooping there because he no longer can deal with a Teferi that's ulted. I have a baby Teferi on the board, and if we just pass turn back and forth, I'm just gonna annihilate his board while building up. And I had plenty of ways to continue to draw more cards. So yeah, that was game 2. Game 3, pretty good on my end too. I managed to be able to get out another Void, Chalice of the Void, and then it was kind of going back and forth a little bit. But the critical part of the game, where I thought was great, it was that I had 2 cards in. I had 5 mana open. I did have a Solitude, and he has a Shredder plus I think a Hearse. So in my hand I had Snapcaster. In my graveyard I had an Archmage Charm and I guess a Pluto Delta or something like that. So now obviously if I cast the Snapcaster, he's just gonna remove the charm. But this time he left my graveyard alone because I assume he had Drown in a lock, right? So what I did was sorry, I think I had 7 mana. So I think my turn I tried to prismatic ending his Shredder because I think I was trying to go for lethal or just big damage. He goes Drown in the lock. In my head now it's like, great, now he drowned, which is good. So that means I can cast my Snapcaster. So I cast my Snapcaster. He doesn't respond to anything. He doesn't tap the Hearse or anything. I go Snapcaster, target Archmage Charm, and then cast the Archmage Charm immediately. And I cast the Draw 2 mode. Reason why I did that was now, because I did that, I end up drawing 2 cards, and his Drown and Lock ends up fizzling because my Prismatic Ending on the stack costs 2. And now I only have 1 card in my graveyard, so yeah, like the Drown just couldn't counter the Prismatic Ending. I get that out, and I just basically take over the game from there. Because we were basically running out of cards too. Like he had a couple of cards. I had basically just a Snapcaster, like a Solitude on the board, and maybe a 5-mana Teferi. I wasn't too sure. I don't think I had a 5-mana Teferi. I think I had the Emperor maybe on the board. I was still ahead. I know for sure he had a bunch of cards in hand, but I think he was getting cucked by the Chalice of the Void because he couldn't remove it. I assume he brought in Kolaghan's Command, stuff like that, but he didn't see the Kolaghan's Command. So with that maneuver, I essentially sealed the game from him because I ended up drawing more cards. He ends up losing the Shredder, ends up losing Drown, and I end up gaining like 3 cards off of that interaction. And yeah, that was basically the game from there. So we spoke after the game, and I told him I thought the shutters, the unlicensed hearse weren't great against me. I like it when people side in graveyard hate against me because it basically makes my deck even better. Because now they wasted maybe 2 to 3 slots, maybe 4 slots even of you know grave hate against my deck, which my deck doesn't really use the grave. The only card that cares for the grave is my Snapcaster, obviously. And if they get rid of my grave, great. My Snapcaster is still a 2/1 body. I can still attack them to death with it. I don't really need my grave. And they played 4 cards that are now either dead or just won't do anything. In his case, the bad thing was that he had Drowning Lock, and obviously Drowning Lock needs your opponent to have a grave, and he was kind of removing it, thus making his drown a lot weaker. And so his counter spells weren't as great as mine. He did play dispute. He does dispute me a few times. I didn't see any spell pierces. Um, at the end of the game, we talked about a little bit, and I told him if he asked him if he played spell pierce. He said he did in the cyborg, but he didn't bring it in against me, and I told him that was a mistake. I think bringing the spell pierce against my particular deck would have been better than bringing in the hearse. Especially when the hearse was also kind of messing with his own game plan with the drowning lock and stuff like that. Um, and so yeah, like I ended up signing out all my ops and signing out one Snapcaster. The reason I sign out all the ops against this particular matchup is obviously I'm putting in Challenge the Void, and honestly I don't want my opponent the Ragavan to hit an op off of my top of my deck, and I also don't want to play op because then if it kind of puts cards into the graveyard, and it makes their drown in the lock a lot better. So that's why I side out the ops. And then take out one Snapcaster because obviously you don't want to play 4 Snapcasters without any ops. It's just not that good. So I end up taking 1 or 2 Snapcasters out, and then just end up putting more hate cards into the my board. I think during game 3, I do also resolve a spell bomb first. So I think turn 1 I spell bomb, turn 2 I challenge the void. So that was really good plays on sequencing of plays. Got really lucky there. Typically that doesn't happen. Typically you either draw one or the other. Obviously if you draw void and you have spell bomb in the hand, just keep it in the hand. You can discard it or something like that if they play a Crocs or something. It's not the worst. But in my case, I ended up just drawing one after the other, and that kind of broke the game from there. Because I think he does Crocs. He puts Crocs in the graveyard. I ended up just cracking the spell bomb. I had a Teferi on the board too, so I cracked the spell bomb, kill off his graveyard, making sure he doesn't have Delirium up for Unholy Heat. So therefore, he could not interact with my 3-mana Teferi. So yeah, game 3 definitely went really really well for me. And I think if he put in the spell pierce, he may have been able to stop the Chalice of the Void. He might have been able to stop the Teferi from coming down, and being able to get rid of it later or something like that. And I think he does get rid of it later, or I kill it off myself or something. Or I think he Furies it, or I don't quite remember how he gets rid of the Teferi, but he does end up getting rid of the 3-mana Teferi, which is that's why we had that interaction between the Drown and the Snapcaster. Okay, let's go ahead and speak about the last game. Last game I played was against Rakdos Scam or Scarm. Now this is my first time ever playing against the deck. I have an idea of what the deck does because I've watched Aspiring Spike play the deck, and I think it's a cool deck that can be very very powerful, that runs on almost no mana because of the way it plays. And so, and I know my opponent's pretty competent, and one of the better players at my LGS, I would think so. And so, game 1, we both mold a 6, I think. I messed up game 1 for sure. So game 1 he goes, turn 1 he goes first. He griefs me. I had 6 cards in my hand. I think it was like two lands plus like 2 ops, and a solitude, and a prismatic ending. Now, I guess for some reason in my head, I didn't put it together that he was playing Scam I should have saw it. For some reason, I was in the mode of thinking he was playing um, Living End. So because of that, I end up not solituding his grief, because if I knew he was playing Scam, I would just solitude the grief, get rid of the grief, so he can't bring it back with like Malekith's Rebirth or something like that. I ended up just skipping my kind of like in the mode of thinking I'm playing against Living End after seeing a turn one grief, and I just let it through, and he ripped out both my removal cards, both my Prismatic Ending and my Solitude. I was like, oh crap! Now he has a 4/2 grief. I'm like, okay, I could still play around it, still play against him. So my turn to play a land. Um, he goes his turn. He plays a Ragavan, and then he attacks me. My turn to play another land. Um, and then his turn he goes. He attacks me again with the Grief and the Ragavan. Um, I just I double op, getting a 3 mana Teferi and something else into my hand, and then he on 2 lands plus the treasure token he cracks the token and plays Blood Moon, and my lands right now is like really bad. I have to get Mystic Gates plus a Plains, and I looked at my hand and was like, dude, there's no way I can answer this. I don't have the blue mana. I saw the island. I shoved the island down because I didn't think I needed the island, and turns out if I had kept the island, I could have probably played the game. I ended up not keeping the island. I shoved it at the bottom of my deck, and now I have a Pluto Delta. I think in my hand, Pluto Delta, Sunken Ruins, and on my board I had a Mystic Gate and Plains, and I drew my top deck. And I was like, oh, this is over. I can't deal with a Blood Moon, Ragavan, and a Grief all at the same time, and especially with my mana being screwed up like that. And I know I don't have any Blood Moon hate really um, in the main, except for maybe if I drew like a March, I can try to March it. But unfortunately, yeah, there's nothing in my main deck that would be able to deal with the Blood Moon with that type of mana. Even if I drew a Prismatic Ending, I would only have 2 colors. I would have white and red from the mountains, and that would not be able to get rid of the Blood Moon. Maybe I can get rid of Ragavan, but that still doesn't help me against the Grief that which was just chunking away at me. It's a 4/2 Grief, so in a couple turns I'll be dead. And yeah, and time was bleeding, and I didn't want to reveal more information about my deck, so I just ended up just scooping game one. Game two went pretty well for me, I want to say. Um, I had like mana up, counterspell, snapcasters, I had removal. I think he turns one Ragavan. I killed the or something like that. Crack land, killed the Ragavan. Had a bunch of mana available to me. He was kind of stumbling on his mana. He wasn't really able to. I think he had like triple black. I didn't see any red lands, so I was like, okay, I'm not really too worried about Blood Moon at this point, and which was fine. I ended up playing like the Emperor, getting a bunch of Snapcaster tokens. He does Fury me, invoke a Fury, and clearing out my Emperor and a couple of like tokens and stuff like that. And then I think he plays Liliana to Edict my token, which is fine. So my turn, after he Liliana, I think he also plays like a Dalfi. I had like maybe a couple cards in my graveyard, and then what I ended up doing was flashing a Snapcaster, casting Archmage's Charm, exiling it, drawing 2 cards. Now Dalfi, I'm not too worried about. It's a a 3/2, and there's nothing that I have given him that he can Dalfi. Like when he casts Dalfi, I respond to the Dalfi by cracking my lands. So he couldn't even get a land off of my my Pluto Delta or my Flooded Strand. So I did that in response. Get out Snapcaster. My turn. I swing at Lily. Lily's at I think it's at 2 loyalty because I think he edicts my token, and then he plus ones the Lily right after that, and then does the Dalfi play. But for me, so I knew Dalfi had Shadow. He can't block my Snapcaster. I killed the Lily. Pass back to him. There's still nothing has been exiled from Delphi. He attacks the Delphi. He passed his turn, and I Solitude, and he that was basically game. He didn't have too much else in his hand, and I just presume that he can't really deal with Solitude. I also had Kaz Guile. He did Thought Seize me, so he does know I have like Kaz Guile and a couple other cards, and those are all great cards against Delphi. So Delphi was just not gonna get any value, and I was not gonna counter anything unless it really had to counter something. But yeah, I ended up just kind of running over his Liliana, getting rid of his Delphi, and he was stuck on like maybe 4 lands to my like 5 or 6 lands at this point. And yeah, that was game 2. Game 3 went again really well for me. I think I had plenty of my hand was really good. I think my hand was 3 lands, Aether Gust, and 2 counter spells. And the reason why I say that's pretty good, um, I think I also drew into a prismatic ending. So he goes first. He goes Ragavan first. I play a Delta. Now I'm a little wary about Blood Moon because I wanted to kind of save the Delta to crack for an island. But knowing that he had a Ragavan, I just had to answer that first and then maybe worry about the Blood Moon after. So I cracked the Delta, go for a prismatic ending his Ragavan, so that's gone. Um, Before I get any further, I guess I'll talk about that after. I'll talk about what I sided in after. I totally forgot about that, but either way, I prismatic ending the Ragavan. He goes and then he invokes Fury, pitches a lightning bolt for the Fury, and then Malekith rebirths the Fury. Now he's still stuck on 1 land, so I was like, okay, let it resolve because I'm already tapped out. My turn. I play a Flooded Strand. I pass. He goes. He decides to attack with the Fury. I crack my Flooded Strand for an island. Now I'm safe from Blood Moon. I think 'cause I also have a Plains in my hand, so I have Plains, Island, and Hollow Fountain on the board. Even if he Blood Moon me, I can still kind of win. Seeing that he was on 1 mana, I might have let the Fury hit me for 8. Sorry, when it wasn't the Malekith Rebirth, it's the other 1 mana revival that gives it a +1. So he had a 4/4 Fury with double strike, so that would be 8 damage. So seeing that he was still stuck on 1 land, he did miss his land drop the previous turn. I decided to just go ahead and Aether Gust the Fury, because I think once I Aether Gust the Fury, sends it back top or bottom. My turn, I draw. I play it doesn't matter what land at this point I play, and I'll have a counter spell up. So I think from there I was really safe, and my hand, the rest of the cards in my hand didn't matter what I was drawing. I had 2 counter spells. That was good enough. Permission spells to kind of just negate what he's gonna do if he decides to play a Delphi or he decides to play like if he tries to invoke something else. I can just counter the invoke. Basically, I was in a good shape. I'm not worried about Blood Moon anymore. I'm not worried about Grief. Maybe he can go for another Fury or something like that. But at that point, I think he was running out of cards in his hand, and yeah, that was game. He decided to scoop it up after seeing that I Aether Gust his Fury on turn 2, and he just couldn't. I think he didn't have any other cards in his hand to apply pressure. So yeah. Let's talk about my side deck against him specifically. I think I did Chalice the Void one of the games, and so that was really good too. So same thing. I think I did this plus this and that, and maybe this, and maybe a Void Rend. I'm not too sure if I put in a Void Rend or not. Yeah, I took out the Ops. I took out a bunch of other stuff that, I didn't want to feed his Fury or feed his Delphi with like Ops, so I took that out. I knew he played Malekith Rebirth, Ragavan, probably Lightning Bolt, and probably like some other 1 mana cards to kind of reborn, Grief and Fury. So I decided to go ahead and chalice it. That way, I know I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. Same thing with Teferi. Teferi is good in this particular matchup. Same thing with Salty. Their entire strategy relies on them sticking a creature onto the board. So if you can Salty or Solitude their creature, it's basically done. And obviously, my favorite card against red, Rakdos decks, green decks, is Aether Gust. Aether Gust Great card for basically a pseudo counter spell that can't be countered by Veil Summers, and it also deals with threats on the board, threats like Ragavan, Fury, or in my case, I was hoping to hold this for Blood Moon, but end up just using it on a Fury, and that's what essentially won me the game. I was able to answer Fury on turn two, and that's what made this so good. Is that he committed so much resources. He committed 3 cards, I believe, or sorry, 2 cards: the Lightning Bolt and the Rebirth card, and obviously the Fury onto the board. And while being stuck at 1 mana, so for me it was like, okay, that's a pretty straightforward thing to do. Is just to Aether Gust it, get it off the board. Now he either has to commit more resources to try to put in a another creature on the board, or just play the long game of just top decking at this point. And with 1 mana, and to my potentially 3 to 4 mana, there was just no way for him to come back from there. If I think he would have been fine if he was making his land drops, but he was not making his land drops. And I noticed that with Skarm too. When I was watching Aspiring Spike plays, sorry, I keep saying Skarm because I keep thinking of the Yu-Gi-Oh card, um, um, the Abyss Yu-Gi-Oh cards I used to play against. But it's Scam, yeah. So I was watching Aspiring Spike play Scam, and I noticed that he goes really ham on the particular strategy, tries to put Fury, tries to put Grief on the board as soon as possible, and just beat your opponent away while they can't really deal with it. Fury essentially is unblockable. It's got double strike. It's gonna kill whatever you try to block it with. 8 damage, so that's like a 2 to 3 turn clock. And they're not making really. He's rarely using his lands for anything outside of just playing like a Ragavan or a Rebirth card. So once I saw that my opponent was stuck on lands, I knew that there's nothing he could play that would essentially get him back into the game. That I didn't have an answer for at that point. So even though his deck is probably low to the ground, he can play like on 1 or 2 mana. I had counter spells up. I had a lot of permission spells, and I had a bunch of removals, so I can just play the long game a lot better. And my deck obviously loves playing long game. Like the longer the game drags on, the better my deck gets because I have Snapcasters. I got big mana planeswalkers. I eventually get threats. So yeah, that was the game, and I thought. While I did misplay on a couple of the matches and games, I think overall I did really well. Did use the a lot of ruling and kind of figure out how to play certain against things, and I think my side decking was really good. My side deck was really good for this particular couple of matchups I played against Grixis, against Mono Black Scam, Rakdos Scam. Those are typically I would say blue-white matchups, like worst matchup, low to the ground decks that interact with your hand and has counter spells, or like makes their creatures really hard to remove. That's what blue-white I think struggles against. And plus because their deck is so fast, you don't really have time to build up your mana and answer all of it. And the fact that my deck was able to kind of just hold its own with that low amount of mana, going second too. Most of the games I went second. I didn't go first. So most of the games I went second, I was still able to hold my own against a great majority of the low to the ground decks, and that was just kind of great. I did have to mulligan once or twice today, but other than that, like all the hands I drew were playable. I thought. And I kept most of them, and was able to just play with most of whatever I drew in top deck, so that was good. But yeah, any last comments here? I want to say this is this month is I guess the anniversary of this particular deck, so I've been playing this deck basically for about a year now, and yeah, think I've came quite a long way. I getting accommodated with the format because I never played Modern before, and just deck building, testing out my side deck, knowing what to side in, knowing what to side out, knowing how other people's deck works and stuff like that. And I actually kind of received like I guess a mini compliment today, in the sense that I heard a couple of players talk amongst themselves. They were like, "Oh, I wish I wasn't hoping, crossing my fingers, not to be paired against uh, um, Dave over here." My real name's not Dave, but yeah. So people were talking amongst themselves, knowing that I guess I'm a decent enough player that they would rather not play against me if they could. So I think that was a kind of a nice compliment there, um, in some sense. I still think the deck can still definitely get better, and um, the, there's cards I could probably definitely cut. Um, I can definitely probably cut Jace from like the deck completely, or I can probably uh, down like Emperor or something like that, or even like Snapcaster. But I kept those cards in because I really like playing with them. Even though they're not always great against every situation, but so far I've been able to kind of play against every meta deck just fine. And sorry, like I mentioned last week, Reed Duke and some other Channel Fireball peoples, they say that blue white control's not the greatest it's been, which I kind of agree. It's in a rough shape. It's definitely not even the top 10 decks that you would face in modern anymore. But yeah, because I think I just stuck with the deck for so long, I know how to pilot it. I know how to play against certain decks that I'm able to get like relatively good results at my locals. And yeah, today we had, I think, 21 players, 22 players. I ended up getting there was a fourth round, but me and my opponent split because we were basically the only undefeated left. Um, so yeah, we ended up splitting. I think he was playing four color control, which my deck does okay against. I have a pretty decent win rate against most four color control decks, just because I think I have a lot of experience playing against them, which is why I think I can do well against four color control, even though four color control is a bad matchup for me. But I think I can do pretty well. Same thing with like when I first started playing this deck back in last year. I wasn't really winning too many games. I was, it was definitely a struggle. I played against like really good decks, really good players. I played against like a lot of Amulet Titan. I played against Is It Phoenix, and just a lot of strategies that were just better than my strategy. Like my strategy is just sitting there doing nothing, leaving my mana open, and they were just pumping out threats, pumping out like damage here and there, you know, and it was just me sitting there trying to react and trying to defend myself essentially. So I always felt like I'm playing like castling. I'm just turtling up, building up my defenses while they're on the aggressive attack. Now, obviously, what people don't expect is sometimes I do flip that around. When I'm able to get the edge, I'm able to flip that around, and I end up being the aggressor sometimes. So, but just playing so much of different games has taught me a lot of things, and I think the deck has evolved kind of with the meta. After Loris got banned and a couple other cards got removed and stuff like that, and us getting new tools and stuff. I think I definitely like the deck where it is right now. And this is the deck I had most fun with, just playing, just piloting in general. Now I obviously don't haven't really played too much Pioneer. I'm trying to finish building my deck again. I shuffled around some cards and sold some cards, so haven't gotten the chance to play Pioneer yet frequently, and I will get to that once I can. But yeah, I think in terms of modern, I think someone asked me if I've gone to any like really huge tournaments, and honestly, I haven't yet. The largest tournament I've been to was like 30, I don't know, 35 players, which is, I mean, it's a good size, but it's nothing like a GP or a 1K or something like that. Um, I'm comfortable enough to do those, but I just don't always have time, and they're not always available around my area for me to go out and do that. But if I ever get the chance to, and I do plan on attending those tournaments one day, and hopefully have my deck perform pretty well. Um, Maybe I'll try to get some sort of small recording thingy, camera thing to kind of record some of my gameplay at my locals, and hopefully be able to put it onto my channel just so you guys can see how I play. I know people like that, like they just want to see, how to maybe interact with your opponent, or maybe how to cast a spell and how to resolve certain things, or just how you think, how long you should take thinking, stuff like that. The minute stuff, just playing Magic in general, and or just any card games in general. And I've been playing for quite a while, card games, I guess. So my mannerism is a lot different when I'm playing casually versus when I'm playing more seriously. Um, and I think it's just kind of a mindset thing. You just gotta train yourself to be able to think under pressure. Kind of you have to. The main thing is you have to kind of shut out your environment and allow yourself to think. Don't listen to what other people say. Don't get if you miss a trigger, you misplay. Don't let that get to you. Try to just play through it. I mean, it happens to the best of us. So just being able to consistently get into the mindset of just being try your best, play your best, and you'll eventually kind of reach that level where you'll play like essentially like a pro essentially. But yeah, maybe that's another topic I can talk about in another video. But anyways, this one's kind of going on for a while, and gonna end it here, and I'll see you guys next Monday.